My profession has always been adult education, and I started in that field when I went to university myself, because I had a tremendous sense of privilege and responsibility, because I went to the University of Oxford, which, as people may know, is one of the sort of ancient and prestigious universities in Britain. And I was very fortunate because there were only 600 of us women among 6,000 men. So that gave me a feeling of, as a woman who'd had that chance, I must try and give some of it back in what way I could. And it was not long after the Second World War, so it was obvious that it was the end of the colonial period, and I thought it would be very exciting to be involved with the regaining of independence by colonial countries. And so I combined that by working in a university in Africa, starting first in what's now Ghana. And the thing about that is that that gave me a chance from a university base to work in programs of adult education at various levels, but which gave me an interest in people who were not necessarily literate but could understand what's going on, but how much better for them if they could gain access to literacy. So I became involved in that, and obviously as a woman I'm very particularly concerned, and was and still am, with the question of literacy for women. Among very memorable and striking experiences I had when I was involved with women's literacy was one where I was in Uganda, and it was in the rains and it was bandit country, and there were these war widows who came to learn to read. And I thought, what is the use of that? Because they had no equipment and they were just writing their name in the mud. And then I saw something. I went to see and read one woman's name, and spelt L-U-S-I in their language, Lucy. And I read out Lucy, and an absolute sunburst of joy came across her face, because I could read her name, and that made her have an identity which anybody could communicate, and which she herself could communicate. And just the sheer fact of writing her name that somebody else could read gave her a feeling of instant, I have to use the jargon word, empowerment. And that was very, very, very remarkable and impressive. It's important to remember that even at the very beginning of just learning to write your name or to write some sentences, it makes a big difference to people's lives. Then further, we must go, I think, to thinking of when women get a bit of literacy and they then become part of organisations, and then much more advanced than what I've been talking about, they begin to play a part in more public arenas and public life. They can get different kinds of employment, they can work getting savings properly looked after, they can avoid being cheated. Literacy is not automatically empowering. I think the point is, if you don't have literacy, you're constantly at threat. A Mozambican woman said, if you don't have literacy, you're always afraid. You can be a non-person because the bureaucracy doesn't recognize you. You can be at the mercy of people who want to exploit you, not pay you your money, all sorts of things. You can get on a bus and the driver doesn't tell you when to get off, and you can't read, so you don't know where you are. All kinds of quite trivial but quite important things in daily life which make you at a disadvantage. So being not literate is disadvantageous. Becoming literate doesn't necessarily empower you, but it is the essential first element in getting to be empowered. And I think that's what's the important thing. Then perhaps another thing to be said is that literacy can be empowering, but we have to remember that empowerment is not really the end of the road, that empowerment is a gradual process, and it should lead to what we might call emancipation, because you can be empowered to do certain things but still within a framework laid down by others. And it's only when you've achieved sufficient literacy that you can actually have real freedom to do what you want, to vote for whom you want, and to maybe go out and set up an organisation for a social purpose that you require, it's only then that you come, well, not to the end of the road, but you come sufficiently far along the road to become not only empowered but emancipated. But if you don't have literacy, you can't take the first step. I think progress towards literacy has been slower than we hoped. I'm so old, I remember when we used to believe we would have universal primary education by 1960, and here we are 40-odd years later, and we haven't got near it. That's partly because of other factors like population increase and that kind of thing, but I think it is partly because there have been certain periods in recent history when there's been quite a good positive push towards literacy in various countries, like when people regained their independence and there were sort of what we call mobilization efforts, but then also some other things, but then it kind of died. And I think one of the tragedies is that not so many countries at the moment seem to me to have the political will, and I think we need more member countries of UNESCO to show the political will, not only for working themselves but for working together with and through UNESCO, so that it becomes a global political will and not just few individual countries.